thanking everyone for being here today. A few more people may join us, but since we do have kind of a hard stop on legal aid's end, I don't want to wait too long. We're so thrilled that you could all be here today for the final webinar series, summer webinar series, the final of the webinars. The Domestic Violence and Family Law Unit is thrilled to kind of be the concluding webinar. I am Stephanie Troyer. I'm one of the supervising attorneys in the Family Law Domestic Violence Unit. I'm going to let Jamie Sperano and Zorba Leslie introduce themselves, but I'll say just a little bit about who I am and how I came to legal aid and my background, and then Jamie and Zorba can do the same. Then we have, some great information that we want to share with you today about our practice and how that has changed in the COVID world. So I began at Legal Aid in 2000. I have seen many changes at Legal Aid over my years here. In 2007, when I joined Legal Aid, I was the 4th attorney in the Family Law Unit. That was a year of expansion for Legal Aid when the DC Council appropriated funding for access to justice to expand legal services in the DC community. And Legal Aid saw a lot of expansion that year, including the family unit. 2 additional attorneys, myself and 1 other attorney joined. But now 12 years later, 13 years later, we have 12 attorneys in the family unit and 2 paralegals. It's been really thrilling over the past 12, 13 years to see the dramatic changes, both at Legal Aid in general and also in the family unit. We have many courthouse projects and ways that we're serving people that have changed and grown and expanded the ways that we're able to reach the community in my time at Legal Aid. And it's been really thrilling to be able to be part of that over these years. I'm originally an Oklahoma native. I came to DC in 1996 for college and then stayed for law school and have mostly been living in the DC area ever since. I really do feel like DC is my home at this point. I briefly worked as a public defender before finding my real home in civil legal services. And I really do love the opportunity to work with people directly, to work with clients. The trial advocacy part of our work is something that really keeps me going and something that I find very motivating. I love working with individual clients and getting to know their life stories and being able to be part of helping them move to a place that is better for them and for their families. And again, it's been really great to see the changes in the legal services world, both at Legal Aid and across the community over the past decade or so. I'll hand it over to Jamie to talk about her journey to Legal Aid, and Zorba has a special connection also to share.
Hi, yes, I'm Jamie Sperano. I'm a senior staff attorney now in the DV and Family Unit at Legal Aid. I started at Legal Aid in 2014 in the spring, so it's been just over 6 years at this point that I've been working in our unit. I am originally from New Jersey and moved down to DC in 2009 to start law school, and have been here mostly ever since, with the exception of a stint clerking back in New Jersey after I graduated school. I have a background mostly in juvenile rights and post-conviction work, collateral consequences, but was very drawn to legal aid family practice, and so that's what brought me here. And so far I've been able to sort of dabble in all of our family law practice areas. I started off almost exclusively doing domestic violence work and protection orders, but now I've expanded to do also child support and custody, divorce, and even a couple of other fringe family law cases and issues like adoption. So it's been a great experience so far at Legal Aid, and I'm thankful to be here and be able to share my experience today.
Thanks for having me on. My name is Zorba Leslie, and I am an associate in Steptoe's Complex Commercial Disputes Group, which is essentially their very large litigation team. I came to DC in 2008, right before the election, and ultimately spent the first 4 years in the area managing anti-slavery programs in Central Africa, in Congo, and then in Haiti for an anti-slavery organization, basically organizing communities to better understand their rights and mobilize to vindicate those rights, including in artisanal mining in Congo and then child trafficking into the rest of that system in Haiti. I went to Howard Law School and had a fantastic experience there here in DC, and was provided an offer to go to a law firm when my wife was 8 months pregnant, and couldn't turn that down, but it wasn't necessarily the trajectory that I thought I was on. I've been practicing at Steptoe for about 5 years now, and the highlight of my practice as an attorney has certainly been the 8 or so months that I spent as a loaned associate, embedded in the team with Jamie and Stephanie and Caroline over at Legal Aid. It was an extraordinary experience. Within just a couple of weeks of starting there, I teamed up with one of Legal Aid's family law attorneys, and we did a fairly exciting Hague Convention child abduction, international child abduction case, litigating on 2 fronts, both in the DC Superior Court as well as the Federal District Court. We were able to prevail there. And then another highlight of my time there was staffing the child support clinic over in DC Superior Court. I've since brought back at least one pro bono case from Legal Aid that I was working on while there, and have really enjoyed working with Legal Aid's attorneys, which I'll discuss a little bit later.
Thanks, Zorba. Caroline, I think we can move forward. Thank you. So there's 4 main things that we want to cover today. The first is really what does the Domestic Violence and Family Law Unit do at Legal Aid? So we'll talk a little bit about what our practice areas look like, the kinds of subspecialties within family law that we specifically handle. Then we'll turn to how have things changed during the COVID-19 pandemic. There are some ways that our practices are similar, working in the remote world and with the kind of court working remotely. Some of those changes are things that we've been involved advocating for the court to implement over the past few months. We certainly have new ways that we're reaching clients and meeting with them and preparing them for their hearings. So that, there are definitely some changes as you would expect over the past few months. Then we'll talk a little bit about who are our clients. How do people find their way to us? Who are we helping? What sorts of issues are we seeing? And give you sort of just a feel of what is it, what are the real effects of the services that we provide to some of our clients. And then lastly, Zorba will probably talk a little bit more, and Jamie and I will jump into about the role of pro bono services and how critically important it is for our client community. We are a larger team than we were 10 years ago, but we still have so much more need than we can serve in-house. And there are particularly important ways that we can tell you about where pro bono attorneys can make a huge difference in the lives of our clients and in the community in general. And then finally, if we have some time, we'd love to take questions from you. And as we're going, if you type questions into the chat, I will try to monitor them. I know Caroline will as well, and we can try to address questions as we go along if you have them. Thank you. So the domestic violence practice and family law at Legal Aid, that's kind of what we first wanted to talk about. And Caroline, you can jump to the next one.
All right, so I'll start by sort of talking about the practice areas that we work in within domestic violence and family law, and focus on what our primary practice areas are. This sort of falls into 3 different categories of areas that we primarily work in. Many of our attorneys focus on assisting domestic violence survivors, primarily providing representation in civil protection order cases. We have projects set up in partnerships so that we are connected with survivors right from the time that they come forward and decide to file for a protection order in court. That way we're able to support them through the entire process of leaving an abusive relationship. That sort of starts with generally reaching out for services and filing a petition for a civil protection order, and then continues through that case, and we offer full representation in negotiations and trials around obtaining protection orders. As much as possible, we try to assist our survivor clients with other family law needs once the protection order is in place. Sometimes this means getting divorced from an abusive spouse, seeking child support, or entering a long-term custody order because a protection order is only going to cover a year of time. And so sometimes it makes sense for our clients to go forward with putting in some long-term parameters when they know that their relationship with this other person is going to have to continue for some reason, like having children in common. Recently started a court-based project in the domestic violence or domestic relations branch at the DC Superior Court, and that branch handles custody, legal separation, and divorce cases. Our project focuses on same-day assistance to litigants in their domestic relations cases. So now we can reach a broader swath of people who have legal issues in those cases and try to support them as they go through that process in the way that we support folks through the domestic violence process as well. Finally, we have a court-based project in the parentage and support branch, which deals with people who come into court for child support and parentage cases. Parentage cases include establishing and disestablishing paternity, both for same-sex and opposite-sex couples, and there are a number of ways to establish paternity. We try to guide people through that process. Our focus in that project is a little bit different in that we are often on the side of the child support payor or the non-custodial parent. Our goal is to ensure that child support orders and findings of parentage and paternity are just and appropriate under the law. We believe that the more these orders are just and legal, the better chance someone has of actually paying them and remaining in compliance with their legal obligations. So that is a bit of a shift from our domestic violence practice, where we are almost always on the side of the sort of petitioner in the case who's asking for relief. The child support project takes a bit more of a defense-minded stance. We also, through the child support court, are keeping an eye out for sort of complex legal issues that folks might not be able to handle on their own if they're unrepresented. And issues like that include disestablishment of paternity, which is something that we often work with the council and the government to advocate for policy change. We have proposals in the works right now. That's just one example of the systemic advocacy that we do around all of these issue areas. And so we have worked on proposed legislation. We often testify before the council about how these agencies we work with are doing, like the Office of the Attorney General, so that we can raise systemic issues as well as handling individual casework for our clients. Caroline, I think the next slide, please. And with that, I think we'll turn back to Stephanie, who can share a little bit about one of our clients who has had issues in a number of these issue areas.
Yes, so this is, at the risk of sounding unprofessional, I shouldn't say that she's my favorite client. She is a long-term client of mine who I really enjoy working with. I love all of my clients. Ms. Coleman is someone who, having worked with her since she first came to legal aid in 2010, we have quite an attorney-client relationship that has spanned lots of different sorts of legal issues. But working with Ms. Coleman is a reminder of why I do love doing the work that we do at Legal Aid. So Ms. Coleman originally came to Legal Aid seeking assistance, and for all of the lawyers here, she has consented that we can talk about her in public settings. But she originally came to Legal Aid seeking assistance with a civil protection order against her ex-partner, the father of her daughter. We were able to help her with that. And then with custody of her daughter and child support, which has kind of over the years, we had a trial for custody and were successful and prevailed there. Child support has cropped up now and again for enforcement issues and changes over the years. But it's been really great working with her over a decade because I've been able to see how the child support has really provided financial stability for Ms. Coleman and her daughter. Her ex-partner has a job where wage withholding is in place, so there's a measure of stability in that. We have been able to help her over the years with Social Security related to her daughter's juvenile diabetes diagnosis. There have been educational issues that we've assisted with as her daughter's school wasn't providing the assistance that was legally required to make sure that she could test her blood as needed to. We've also helped with housing issues over the years. We really we strive when we can throughout all of our units to provide holistic services, and Ms. Coleman is really an example of that. She came and attended one of our Servant of Justice dinners a couple of years ago. She's just a really special person who's been working with legal aid for years, and it really, I think, she's kind of an exemplar of the sort of experience that you can have, having the privilege of working with someone and kind of seeing them through as we assist in helping people get to where they want to be and where they should be. It's been a really great experience, and I'm thrilled to be able to share some of these beautiful photos of her and her daughter with you today. Caroline, we can go to the next one. So we want to shift topics a little bit away from what we do and the kinds of cases we handle to talk a bit more specific about the pandemic. There have absolutely been changes both in the way physically legal aid is working, how the court is working, and how we interact with clients. Caroline, you can go ahead and jump to the next slide. Jamie's going to chat a little bit more about the domestic violence world and the changes that have happened both in the court, the things that we've advocated for. And then I'll talk a bit more about the domestic relations, which is the custody and divorce kind of section of the court, as well as the paternity and support or parentage and support, where child support and parentage happens. But Jamie, first I'll let you chat a bit about domestic violence.
Sure. So prior to the COVID-19 related shutdowns, the primary point of access for domestic violence survivors was through the court's 2 domestic violence intake centers. One was operated out of the courthouse and one was out in Southeast DC at United Medical Center. And those 2 centers provided sort of a one-stop shop for survivors to get connected with advocates, to file for civil protection orders, to meet with attorneys, to potentially even speak with counselors or police, all in one office. So they could sort of come in the midst of their crisis and get access to a lot of different resources. Those offices are operating remotely now. So the court and our organization and others have had to adapt with new processes to make sure people can still access all of the same resources from their homes or from other safe places that they've managed to reach. We have worked with the court to develop a process for assisting folks with drafting and filing civil protection orders. The court put their entire process online to file for protection orders, and so there is a series of forms online that folks have to fill out. What we found, though, is that people have technological barriers and still need help filling out those forms because they may not have access to the internet or a computer to do it themselves. And sometimes it's not always obvious what exactly to fill in where to pro se people who are trying to navigate these systems after having experienced trauma. So we partnered with the court and with DC Safe, an advocacy organization, to receive referrals for folks who need help with filing their petitions, and we help people draft those and file them. We connect them with the court to make sure that they are getting all the relevant information. And then we're still, planning to represent folks in a lot of those cases once the court gets back up and going. At this point, the court has tried to move some of its operations online. They are still holding temporary protection order hearings virtually. So when someone comes in to file for a protection order, if some sort of urgent incident has happened and they are in immediate danger, the court can issue a temporary protection order that requires the abusive person to stay away and not contact them until there can be a hearing on the petition. Normally, this is a 2-week turnaround, since the temporary protection order is only in place for a short amount of time. But since the court is closed, they're pushing a lot of these hearings out into the fall, and they've made provisions now to extend the temporary orders until whenever the hearing is going to be, even though that may be a couple of months out. So this does provide an extra service and protection for survivors so that they can feel a bit safer in the meantime before they actually have a chance to have a hearing. Recently, the court also sort of added in a layer to the process of negotiation. So there are attorney negotiators who work for the court who have the goal of trying to see if they can settle any of these cases or reach agreements on protection orders. So we have been working with our clients to submit proposed orders to the court and talk to the negotiators and see if they can reach out to the opposing parties and try to settle some of these cases so that we can get into court sooner and just get these orders in place and wrap up these cases for people who are sort of waiting for months at a time to achieve the safety and stability that they're looking for. Other service providers are working remotely as well. So we've been working to connect people with crime victims compensation and safe housing options, as well as counseling. And many places are still operating remote intake and able to provide those services. We know that domestic violence shelters have implemented extra cleaning option plans and trying to keep things safe for folks who have to take advantage of those facilities. And we know that survivors are sort of extra stuck with their abusers right now. And we have been working with people as much as possible to get them to safety. And the court has been as accommodating as they can be to keep the domestic violence process up and running.
Great, thanks, Jamie. I'll talk a little bit about the other kind of pieces of our practice, the custody, child support, divorce work that we do. So there's two other divisions of the court, the parentage and support branch. They recently changed the name, and so I'm sorry, I stumble over that a little bit. I need to remind myself, parentage and support branch, as well as the domestic relations branch. And similarly to what Jamie was describing in the CPO world with the domestic violence division, and as you probably are all familiar with, there was a period where the court was really shut down in a very real way, in that there were no hearings happening, and also people could not file anything if they wanted to. There weren't even mechanisms in place for remote filings. Happily, that changed for all of our the divisions that we work with, but specifically in the parentage support branch and the domestic relations branch, it took a while before people could even file emergency motions if, for instance, their child was being withheld contrary to a custody order. Normally, a parent would have access to the court and could go and file an emergency motion and say, I want the court's assistance. The other parent has kidnapped our child or is withholding, and I want court intervention to help me resolve this. There was certainly a period of time in March and April when there were not mechanisms yet in place to accept those. Pretty quickly for the domestic relations branch, the court got set up some avenues so that people could file electronically over email. Legal aid was part, and particularly Eric Angel, our executive director, in making sure that there were processes in place for people who couldn't use the filing system that attorneys usually use, Case File Express, and trying to resolve issues with filing fees for people who needed fee waivers. Those have kind of behind the scenes, Eric has been playing a role in making sure that people in our client community have the ability to file things and seek court intervention when needed. We have finally arrived at a place where the court is accepting pleadings generally, both in domestic relations and paternity and support. It took a little bit longer, and we were certainly working with the court for a while, pushing for them to accept motions to modify child support. Those are particularly critical for people to file right when a change in circumstance happens. So the way the child support is calculated in DC, it's based upon the income of both parents, and there's a formula that is used. And once the child support order is in place, in order to change it, you have to prove that there's a substantial and material change in circumstance, and you can't go back in time. So if you lose your job and maybe related to the pandemic or illness, and you wait 2 months to file a motion to modify, you can't have the order changed back as of the day that illness or loss of job occurred. So people really need access to the court to file a motion to modify right away, or they will accrue arrears that they have no ability to pay while they're waiting for the court to reopen and for there to be a mechanism in place to file that motion to modify. So we're now at a point where people can file things in court. They can either do that. Unrepresented people can use the system that attorneys use, although it's not the most user-friendly process in place. But there are also ways for people to file over email if they have a fee waiver. There's kind of a problem for people who need to pay filing fees because they are above income thresholds, but may not be able to use Case File Express. And for all of those sorts of technological issues, both with the Parentage and Support branch and the Domestic Relations branch, Legal Aid has what we would have thought of as a courthouse or court-based project in the past, which is now really kind of almost a remote courthouse office, where we have attorneys that are working with both of those branches to help people file things if they have technological issues. So in the months as we were waiting and kind of working, through advocacy and other mechanisms to get the court to have the most accessible processes in place, we have also quickly developed our own internal ways to serve clients through what I kind of consider remote courthouse projects. So for the Domestic Relations branch, we have a partnership with two other legal services organizations, the DC Affordable Law Firm and the Pro Bono Center, where we have an attorney on staff each day of the week rotating with the different organizations. And the Family Court Self-Help Center sends us litigants who either need legal services, need advice, or are having trouble with the electronic ways of filing that are available right now. And so we draft pleadings for those litigants. We give advice, we represent, we have appeared in remote hearings for people whose children have been kidnapped by another parent or a third party. We're serving people as best as we can in this remote setting, but we've made sure that we now are accessible to people who are finding either their way to the Family Court Self-Help Center or to Legal Aid's general intake lines, or conducting online intake. So we have people set up every day of the week who are answering those calls and representing litigants. We also now have the Child Support Resource Center is an office that we had at the courthouse that we staff with Bread for the City, where an attorney was available 5 days a week for people who had parentage and support hearings. As Jamie mentioned before, that's really child support, establishing child support, modifying child support, establishing paternity, disestablishing paternity or parentage. There's lots of really interesting legal issues that we litigate out of that office. And actually just this week, we now have a remote child support resource center that is up and running with Bread for the City, where every day of the week we have a hotline and people call and they can get immediate on the spot advice and also representation in remote hearings, which also began last Thursday in the Parentage and Support branch. So we're really trying to, we have been working to reallocate the way our attorneys are finding clients, are available to clients, and working with the court so that we can know about hearings, know when they're being scheduled, and reach out to people when it's possible to do so, or make sure that the judges, court staff, the Office of the Attorney General, that people are referring litigants to us when they need legal services. One other thing that we've been doing in the COVID world is we, through working with some other legal services partners, were able to convince the judges that we could be a partner, be in partnership with them to explain to people both that when they have remote hearings that are being scheduled and how to log in, kind of working to publicize these new processes the court is implementing. So the court has been providing us with the dockets for domestic relations hearings that are being scheduled. So these are mostly more urgent hearings where people may have some kind of emergency issue with child custody, but the court is now also beginning to schedule some initial hearings. There's quite a backlog, as you could imagine, since March. And Legal Aid receives dockets for all of those hearings that are being scheduled. and paralegals at Legal Aid, and some of our summer interns, I think at least one, if not both, are here today, have been calling through those litigants and letting them know that they have hearings. And we've found that there have been many people who were not aware that the court had scheduled a hearing until someone from our staff called to let them know. And at that point, the litigants can then figure out, is this something they want to go forward with? Would they prefer to ask the court to wait until they can have a hearing in person? We can also help them figure out how to log into the court's video conferencing system, explain how to call by telephone if that's what they prefer, or that's all that they're able to do. So it's really been, I think, a great service that we've been able to provide, and also helps us know how big of an issue is the technology, that piece, and the notice piece. So we kind of have an insight into how that's going. And I think it for the most part, it's going well, and most people know about their hearings, but we've certainly found many who did not. So we're trying to play a role both in making sure that there's lots of new ways for litigants to find our services through these kind of remote courthouse projects. We're working with judges and their staff and court administrative staff to make sure that when notices go out to litigants, that they have information about these remote courthouse offices so that people can call us ahead of time. We've worked with the Family Court Self-Help Center, which is where litigants will go, kind of their first entry point if they're seeking help, so that people can reach out to us that way. I think we're really trying to be nimble and make sure that we are flexible as different issues pop up, so that we can set up and kind of redirect our services to where they're most needed. Caroline, I think we can jump to the next one. Great.
So as Stephanie mentioned earlier, we really do strive to provide holistic services to our clients. Our clients, especially those experiencing domestic violence, have a lot of options to weigh in terms of what kinds of cases to file and what to go forward with, and ultimately what achieves their goals the best. And it's important to us to support our clients in achieving those goals and achieving the stability and safety that they need. Zorba, do you want to weigh in here on what client-focused representation means to you?
Well, I can certainly weigh in with regard to what I saw you all practice. And in my mind, it means that you meet clients where they are, as they are, with all the wonderful spirit and all of the baggage and burdens that life has thrown their way, and you show them grace and they show it back to you, and you accompany them in what is probably, in many cases, the most stressful, difficult situation that they will face in life with their family members. It's often acrimonious, it's often exceptionally painful, and always very stressful. And so client-focused representation at Legal Aid to me means that you do that good work as zealous advocates as we're trained to be and as we're called to be as litigators, but you do it in a way that shows them grace and compassion, and that's why I'm so thankful to associate with Legal Aid.
Thank you, Zorba. Caroline, I think we can move to the next slide. So I'll say a little bit about who are these people that we are helping. In very broad strokes, our clients are people who are living in poverty, mostly in the District of Columbia, though occasionally we help folks who live just outside of DC and still have DC legal issues. Our family unit clients are domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking survivors. They are very often people who have children with their abusive partners. They might be child support obligees, and they might be child support obligors. They could be people seeking to establish or disestablish parentage of a child. One client in particular, named Anna Jones, came to Legal Aid for help obtaining custody of her daughter. So I'm going to share a little bit about her story, and then you'll have a chance to hear from her herself. Ms. Jones suffered years of abuse at the hands of her child's father. He did horrible things, including hitting her in the head while she was holding the child. He he pushed her around quite a bit. He kept her from leaving the house. He manipulated her to cut off relationships with people who cared about her, and really just put her in a very bad, very unsafe situation. Not long after her child was born, once she realized that the abuse was going to carry over onto her daughter, she realized that she had to get away. And what that required for her was actually going into hiding. So she quit her job and she moved into a shared house where she could rent a room. And for about 2 years, she really stayed incognito, and to make sure that he could not find her. And finally, she worked up the courage to come forward and file for custody and get a protection order so that she could resume living her life and provide better for her child. And she came forward to file for a protection order and connected with legal aid. And so now we have a short video from Ms. Jones, which we will play for you.
Sorry, everyone, bear with me for one moment as I'm figuring out the screen sharing.
Do other folks have volume? I'm texting Caroline to let her know. No, Zorbid, no. Caroline, we don't have any volume if you can hear me.
Sorry, folks, I'm trying to figure out how to fix the volume issue. Just give me one moment.
Jamie and Zorbit, we could go ahead and move on to talking about how important pro bono assistance is and come back to Ms. Jones, if we can figure out the volume. Oh, Zorba, now I can't hear you, Zorba.
Okay, how about now?
Yes, great.
Okay, and I'll be happy to start that conversation. From the perspective of somebody who's done pro bono work with legal aid, but then I think Jamie and Stephanie, you'll need to jump in to speak more directly to the importance of being able to partner with firms and other outside counsel. I've already bragged up the work that legal aid does, but I'll just start by saying again that Jamie and Stephanie are really, I think, the advocates, the attorneys that we all went to law school aspiring to be. You know, they're strategic, they're fierce, they're compassionate, and they provide the most excellent representation to people who need it most. But you know, the team over at Legal Aid, the family law team, and the other teams, you know, as good as the work is, they can only be in so many courtrooms, and so many intake centers and clinics as their staff can be in. So that's where the broader, I think, private practice community comes in, to support that work, to take on complex cases, especially the resource demanding cases, so that clients who legal aid simply can't support for a variety of reasons get the support for their needy cases. And that's, I think, really the second reason why pro bono services are so critical, is that there are certain cases that legal aid determines are meritorious and that really need pro bono assistance or legal aid assistance, but that end up being more complicated, more complex than the limited financial resources legal aid has at its disposal is able to resource. And that may be because they're up against another litigant that can pay for depositions. It may be that a client really needs to have an expert come in to speak on their behalf, to speak to the complexities, the challenges, the harm perhaps that a child is facing. And that was definitely the case in one of the matters that I took on pro bono for legal aid, where my client was a non-native English speaker. She had been going up against an abusive former husband for over half a decade in various courtroom battles. And at the end of the day, we just needed to get an expert in that courtroom to explain to the judge the extraordinary harm that years and years of emotional and mounting physical abuse had caused this child. And ultimately that resulted in our client getting the outcome both she and her, most importantly, her daughter needed, which was full custody. And sometimes legal aid simply isn't able to line up those material resources for the depositions, for the experts, and everything else that often comes into more complex cases. And that's where pro bono services of outside law firms can really be critical, I think, is you know, at firms we have so many more resources. I think the other piece is that as litigators, we can bring insights to approaching cases in ways that perhaps don't have the nuanced understanding of family law that Jamie and Stephanie and the rest of the team have, but that might solve problems that the normal toolkit doesn't solve. And that's not to take away, of course, from any of the innovative ways that they approach the representations, but sometimes when you go at those cases from a different angle, especially when a matter has been going on for a number of years, then it can really help solve those problems. So maybe the third reason, and this one's more of a kind of a professional reason, is we all agreed when we took our oaths to commit to the legal profession. And I believe as a private litigant or a litigator, that means you have a professional ethical responsibility to indigent clients to provide representation, to support legal services organizations like Legal Aid. That's why I've been really proud to be involved in the Generous Associates campaign, now the Making Justice Real campaign for the last 5 years. And so providing pro bono services is an excellent way to meet that professional ethical obligation that I believe we all have.
And to kind of echo and build on what Zorba was saying, there really is such a hugely important role that pro bono attorneys can play in representing people who do have some of those needs, where, you know, for depositions or you know, other kinds of litigation tools that we may not have the resources to provide. There are also, though, cases that that would be much shorter, and where you might not, some of our cases may take years to resolve, and you could certainly sign up for a case where we expect that it might be a long and complicated one. But there are also cases where we don't think that all of those strategies and techniques are going to come into play, but someone really needs an attorney to stand up with them because they are intimidated by being in court, as many, if not most people are, or where the kind of nature of the relationship with the opposing party makes the litigant nervous or concerned about expressing their views in court. We've certainly represented people where the actual legal issues aren't that complex, but the presence of a lawyer makes all the difference because, particularly for our domestic violence survivor clients, there are dynamics in play in the relationship that can make it really difficult for the survivor to advocate for herself, himself in court. And so those can be cases where you really can make a huge difference, even if it's not a significant amount of time. So there's certainly a spectrum of things, and we're happy to work with attorneys to figure out what best suits your level of experience, how comfortable you are, whether or not you have co-counsel in representing someone from a firm or an organization that you're part of. So there's certainly a spectrum of things, and we are always thrilled to have people get involved, and we will kind of work with you for what you're looking for. There's certainly so much need that we're thrilled to work with you on that.
And Stephanie, I was remiss in not highlighting the many benefits that one obtains from pro bono representation. As newly minted lawyers, as I believe many of those calling in are soon to be newly minted lawyers, you'll find that maybe the image of litigating is not what you're doing, at least the first few years at a big law firm. But if you take on a pro bono representation with legal aid, you're essentially guaranteed to have a degree of responsibility and opportunity for professional growth and personal growth that you wouldn't have with a paid representation. As in my first year, I got to take and defend depositions as a first-year associate, and no client would pay for that at a big law firm. With my pro bono representation with legal aid, I got to chair trials and do crosses and directs and introduce exhibits, all those things that you learn in law school, but that if you don't actually practice it when you graduate, those skills get a little rusty. So, working with legal aid and in the pro bono representations provides an excellent opportunity to do that. And then from a very personal level, it's exceptionally gratifying to accompany somebody, to meet somebody where they're at, as legal aid does every day, in this very stressful moment, and to learn from them, to gain a more nuanced understanding about what it means to represent folks in the most important, most challenging, perhaps not as attention-grabbing of cases, but in doing the really good work and down at DC Superior. So it's remarkably gratifying. And if all of that seems daunting, as I realize it may, you should know that legal aid squad of attorneys is a force to be reckoned with down at the courthouse. I know it's a little bit different now with COVID representations, but I'll tell you what, when I was there as a loaned associate, and then once I came back to my law firm and I was trying my case, there was a legal aid family law attorney. There were at least 3 at any given time in the hallway outside my courtroom or peeking in the window. And there were multiple times in the middle of my trial when I looked back and I didn't know the answer to the question. And they were on their feet and they were leaning forward, ready to provide the sage counsel that I needed to prevail on behalf of my client. So you should know that if you take one of these cases on, you will have that force to be reckoned with behind your back, providing sage counsel, always ready to provide a template for a filing, counsel on how to deal with a particularly difficult strategic decision. It's really a pleasure to work with Legal Aid as a pro bono attorney.
Thank you, Zorba, and I'm sure everyone can imagine that we were so fortunate to have Zorba with us, and when his rotation with Legal Aid ended, it was quite a loss for us and our clients, but it's so great that you're still part of our family, and we're not going to let you go.
Thanks so much, Steph.
Oh, I think we may have the video that we could try to show now. If people have questions, though, we're happy to field those. I also could try to circulate a link to the video later for people who registered, but if there aren't really any questions, we could go ahead and play it. But if anyone wants to unmute themselves now or type something into the chat, we can certainly do that too. Maybe, Caroline, if you want to try to queue it up, and we'll see if it works. And in the meantime, if someone jumps in with a question, we could hold off.
All right, it's unfortunately telling me that I have to install another application in order to share the audio, so I'm very sorry about that, but I will post the video in the chat and can email it out to all the attendants.
Oh, thank you so much, Caroline. We really appreciate it. Any questions, any things that piqued your interest that you'd like to know more about? We have about 5 minutes before I think the Zoom may cut us off. Jamie, have you thought of any things that we, kind of COVID world issues that we've forgotten about?
I don't think so. I think the one interesting thing we're seeing is that as, the court gets more comfortable with the use of technology and the virtual hearings, we're entering a world now where we are going to have virtual trials, and we're hearing those increasingly getting scheduled. And so the sort of next challenge in navigating this COVID world will be to figure out best practices for not just the status hearings we've been having virtually, but actual full trials with evidence and witnesses and things like that. We've seen judges start to send out Dropbox links to submit exhibits ahead of time, and starting to think through the logistics of how a trial will go with multiple witnesses. So far, I don't know that any of us at Legal Aid have tackled that yet, but I think we're looking forward to that as the next step in the developments the court is going to make.
That's such a great point, and I do feel like I'm sure everyone is experiencing this in their in their own practice, in their own kind of positions that they're in and communities that they're in. But I do feel like we are pivoting quickly to embracing new technologies and figuring out new tools where these things may normally take us years, but we just don't have that to try to adopt new strategies. But here, I've heard people expressing concerns about, in a virtual remote hearing, video hearing, how to handle witnesses who may be in the background off screen hearing testimony when normally we would exclude any witnesses from the testimony of, from hearing testimony of other witnesses. What to do about people reading from off screen, when they would normally refresh their recollection and then put something away. So there's just a lot of concerns, and it is clear that the court has to move ahead in scheduling hearings. But we also have to be nimble and quickly think about all of the different protections that we should at least try to put in place. There will certainly be things that we can't account for necessarily, but we want to try to think of all of them. So it's really, it's just a new kind of practice that we're moving into, which, we invite all of you, and hopefully this will be something where people can share their thoughts and their ideas, strategies as we move forward. But yeah, it seems like it's coming pretty quickly. And some judges are more quick to embrace scheduling evidentiary hearings, and some are less excited about doing it, probably for some of those concerns. But it seems pretty clear that we will be doing it soon. Zorba, Jamie, any concluding thoughts before we wrap up?
No, just thanks to everyone who showed interest and joined us today. Stephanie and I and anyone at Legal Aid are always available and happy to answer any questions about our family law practice and how you can help us and support Legal Aid and take on cases. So feel free to reach out to us at any point in the future, and we will be happy to discuss further with you.
I likewise am available and am always happy to discuss what it's like to be more public interest minded associate at a big law firm, especially for those of you who may have mixed feelings about going into big law, as I know some do. I'm also very happy to make a plug for the Making Justice Real campaign. I think most of you probably have one going on at your firms right now, and it can't be understated or sufficiently overstated that Legal Aid needs us today more than ever, and your financial support, because we can all do it, is essential. So please contribute to your firm's campaigns. You can contribute to Steptoe's campaign, but however you do it, however you can, if you can, please contribute to support Legal Aid, in addition to taking on some cases later on down the road.
Thank you so much, Zorba. Thank you, Jamie. Special thank you to Caroline, who's been personing the technology. I really appreciate it. And thank you all so much for joining us today. This was really great. And I feel fortunate that we were able to be the concluding webinar for the summer series. I understand there might be some more in the future, and we welcome you to kind of keep your eye out for those. So thank you all. See you again.
Thanks.